Hello there, my friends. Assalamu alaikum. It's good to be with you again for another episode of Quranic reflections. And this time I'm going to deal with 4 questions again. The first question will take up 80% of this video, just a prior warning. And the other 3 questions I'll just deal with in the last 5 minutes. So here we go. I'm going to give you responses to these questions. The first one is a lengthy, elaborate, expanded response. And I hope you will be able to give me some feedback on your thoughts. Feel free to give me a comment if you have a different view or if you have additional ideas that you'd like to add. But I'm going to present to you what I see from the text of the Holy Mus'haf, from the Qur'an al-Azim, from the noble message of Almighty Allah. And I'm going to share with you my reading of the text. Okay, so let's go to the first question. What is the Qur'an's approach to marriage and sex? Now, that is it's a question that I think people find off-putting. They don't want to discuss these topics really. And I want to give you a small introduction to this question. You see, I had a discussion, a very close friend, he's a much more learned man. He's a graduate from a very high-level international school, a religious school, seminary, and he's also a full-time lecturer at the university, and he's much more immersed in the sciences, the sciences of religion, of Qur'an, even of hadith. So he doesn't share my position on hadith, not being a central, critical, essential part of constructing an Islamic or a Quranic worldview. He holds the view, that hadith does form a core central part. But on this point, he had an amazing observation, and I share this observation that he made. I don't know the exact words he used, but he said to me, Anwar, isn't it amazing how a community can mirror the behavior of its adversary? How a community who's adversarial to another community, how they can in fact mirror each other's behavior. And he took the example of the developments in the country of Syria, where the Sunni ISIS connected or Al-Qaeda connected powers, in persons or forces, took control of the country away from the Shia government of Bashar al-Assad. But shortly after they took power, they in fact made it compulsory to visit the grave of Muawiyah. And he had this on good authority, he wasn't just looking at social media. That there was in fact a move back to declaring Muawiyah's grave site or the mosque of Muawiyah a compulsory visiting site, what they call in Arabic a ziyarat place, And he says very much against their own sort of core foundational beliefs that you should not in any way acknowledge, recognize, respect, or celebrate the grave of important people. And so what he was in fact saying was that the behavior of the Shia, where they venerate graves, where they venerate the graves of important people, suddenly that behavior was now mirrored within the Salafist ISIS guys who were running Syria now, who in fact don't even agree with the veneration of graves, but that they in fact have adopted or they are trying to almost like reverse the behavior but maintain the same type of behavior. Now, why am I making this point? I make this point because I've actually seen this in my own experience. I've literally seen this. In the recent past, I've heard quite a few times where when somebody passes away, maybe not by learned people, but by ordinary Muslim people, where they would make the claim that, especially enlightened, more secular orientated Muslims, where they would mirror the behavior of non-Muslims in terms of the dead, and where they would claim that, don't worry, your father is looking down on you. You understand? So that type of phrase, that type of image that we find in Western sort of neo-spiritual kind of postmodern spiritualist thinking, that type of image is now mimicked or copied by Muslims when they claim that, you know what, it's such a great day today, and how your mum or our mom is looking down on us, smiling. You know, that type of image. I don't want to belabor the point, but I want you to get what I'm saying is that people might be adversarial to another group, but that doesn't stop them from mimicking or creating a similar but readjusted practice within their own belief system. Now, here comes the point of it all. I want to make the argument that Muslims' understanding of marriage and sex has undergone a mirror image, a mimicking of the Christian understanding of marriage and sex. That's the thesis I am making in this video, and I'm going to disprove it. I'm going to show you otherwise by going back to the source material, the Quran. Let's first think of the Christian understanding of marriage and sex. Now, we know for a fact that there is quite a bit of Christianity has a much more skeptical view on marriage and sex, and we know I've got a few quotes here. For example, let me just take. Let's have a look at these quotes, which will illustrate the point I'm trying to make. Let's take Saint Augustine, which is a very, very highly celebrated Christian authority, on Christianity, who said that complete abstinence is easier than perfect moderation. So, in other words, decrying or reducing, the practice of sex to subordinate, to lesser than moderate, than a moderately allowed level of sexual relationships. Or Saint Paul, famous Saint Paul, who says in 1 Corinthians 7 verses 1 to 2, "It is good for a man not to touch a woman, but because of immoralities, each man is to have his own wife, and each woman is to have her own husband. It is good for a man not to touch a woman." So in other words, he's first of all setting up the default is for a man not to touch a woman, right? In other words, still elevating, sort of complete abstinence to above lawful and moderate engagement. Well, then there's Thomas Aquinas, the famous Saint Thomas Aquinas. "The sexual act is not evil in itself, but it is a lesser good compared to the higher goods of the soul." There you have it. The ideas of classic Christian authorities being of the opinion that abstinence is a higher level of spirituality than moderate engagement in sexual relations. Now, remember my point. My point is that Muslims have, with the necessary adjustments and the logical readjustments, have adopted a Christian outlook on marriage and sexual relations. Now, that is why, now let me be a bit more specific. What can I point to that illustrates my point? Okay, now let's take, for example, now that is just on the level of elevating marriage to abstinence to higher than marriage. But that's not the only way I want to argue. You see, there are other ways also. Like monogamy. Monogamy, and I know I'm going to get some contrary positions as I make this point now, that monogamy is also, elevated to above polygamy, because Islam, obviously, it does appear from a particular verse, I think somewhere in chapter 4, that men are allowed to engage in multiple relationships with more than one woman. So while I am conceiving of Muslims having constructed a view of marriage and sexual relations that mimics or kind of approaches or approximates the Christian vision, is number one, in looking at sex with suspicion. All right, so looking at sex, number one, with suspicion. So Muslims have similarly looked at sex as something that is perhaps somewhat suspect, that is somewhat dirty, it is somewhat not really one of the best practices, or one of the good practices that one can engage in. I'm not saying, I'm generalizing, but let me exclude a huge part of the Muslim world, and I'm not claiming that it's all Muslims, right? The general view of Islam is that engaging in sex in a legal and permissible framework is a blessing. It's a meritorious act. It's not something that can be in any way criticized or viewed negatively. But I'm saying that there are aspects of the Christian view on sex and marriage that are being embraced and adopted. Number one, like I say, the viewing of sex with some level of suspicion, the moving towards making sex sort of a one context practice, and that it cannot be practiced in more than a permanent monogamous relationship. And so that vision of marriage, that marriage is between obviously man and woman. There's no position in Islam that it's not between a man and a woman, but that it is between a man and a woman who are committed to each other, one to one, for eternity, till death do us part. That is the part where I feel that Muslims have started to merge or move towards that vision of marriage and sex. Whereas the Quran has a different view. The Quran has a different view, right? The Quran, from the Quran that I've read, is it first of all establishes the principle of restraint and sort of being of discretion when it comes to sex, right? And that is very, very clear from some of the verses. I want to show you the first verse in this series of verses, and this is a very beautiful verse. In fact, it covers a number of positive traits and behaviors. And I'm just going to do the English for now to save time. And the beautiful run up to the actual point I want to make goes as follows. Indeed, compliant men and women, embracing men and women, devout men and women, honest men and women, resilient men and women, humble men and women, charitable men and women, fasting men and women, men, here comes the key point, men and women who guard their sexual urge. That's the point. And men and women who remain conscious. For them all, God has forgiveness and an irrevocable reward waiting. God has forgiveness and an irrevocable reward waiting. What a powerful and profound verse that summarizes in a few lines sort of the universal traits of a successful and a great human being, by compliance, being embracing of what is true, devout, honest, resilient, humble, charitable, fasting. In other words, you know what we mean by fasting. It's not just staying without food. It's restraining ourselves. Men and women who guard their sexual urge. And so right there, in that verse, right there, we are establishing, God establishes the bottom line, the baseline of being in control of the sexual urge. And the sexual urge is something that needs to be controlled. Let's look at another verse. There's another verse actually that, that also says more or less the same thing. 23 verse 5, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ. Those who guard their sexual urges, and then it continues, except to their marriage partners and to those bound to them contractually. Now we are moving into the different modes of locating a sexual relationship, right? Because now the Quran is already now clearly mentioning two forms of modes. You just have to have a very low level of intelligence to see illa ala azwajihim aw ma malakat aymanuhum. Except, so those who locate or confine their sexual expression only to their marriage partners or to those bound to them contractually. Now you see clearly here we get the impression that there is more than one option within which we can be sexually active. Clearly, I mean that if you just use a little bit of logic, you can see it is either here or there, which means they can't both be normal marriage, which is something completely different from what the Christian vision of sex and marriage is, right? And then, of course, it goes on in the next verse and makes the point very clearly that whoever desires sex beyond this are transgressing. So that's another very clear indication that sex has to be governed, has to be controlled within a particular framework, and not outside of that framework. There's another good verse that also alludes to this. Let me just quickly get there. Tell the embracers that they should be men who always look away and not stare, thereby guarding their sexual urge. Another verse that enforces or lays down the requirement for men and women, because the next verse speaks about women, to always refrain from indulging in a practice that will set your sexual urge on fire. So in other words, don't go, and as they say in everyday language, don't go and make yourself horny for no reason when the time isn't right. And I think this verse clearly refers actually to pornography, also to the naked image of women, naked movies, whatever. I want to actually make that connection, although you might argue with me. Like the very next verse then makes the same call to our dear sisters. And it says, tell the women embracers that they should be women who look away and not stare, thereby guarding their sexual urge. And then it adds, women who embrace also do not make a display of their attractive feminine features, except those parts that need to be visible. Tell them to pull part of their cloth coverings over their chest area. Right. So I think we can agree that already we've gotten a glimpse to see that the Quran allows more than one avenue towards the sexual fulfillment, right? But that it also makes the point that governance or restraint of the urge is important. That you should not just, flout or just seek to get that, arousal at any given time. And so the reason I think we have such a huge amount of problems in the world today is that, the sexual arousal is being used. It is used as a marketing technique. It is used as a means of drawing people's attention, and the people who are using and flouting and trying to immerse us in a sexualized world where everywhere we look, we as men and women, we are sexualized. We are aroused sexually. The reason for that is just simply, if you really think through it, it is simply a matter of capitalism, of promoting materialism, promoting consumerism, promoting any type of thing. A car, anything will be sold by using the naked female form, or even the male form. And what the Quran is saying here is, do not let this arousal be willy-nilly. Govern it, control it, let it come out when you need it, and not everywhere. I'm just thinking now. Imagine you allow that with liquor or with drugs. You just tell people it's fine to take the drug, to drink the booze anytime, but they will tell you to get into a sexual mode at any time, which is I think the ridiculous point that the Quran is trying to reject or repudiate here, is that you cannot turn that sexual urge on any time. You need to control it and turn it on when you need it. Okay, so now I think we've said enough about the basic bottom line. That is the bottom line of what the Quran wants, is for us to be realized that this is something you've got to govern. But now we come to how the Quran allows for you to live out, to give vent, to give expression to that natural inborn tendency that we all have, men and women. Most of us, 99.9% of us. And I'm going to show you a few verses that will illustrate to you the various avenues, and I'm going to summarize it. Now, firstly, there is this verse that profoundly makes the point. It says, first of all, we all know that monogamy, marrying one woman, is acceptable, right? There's no dispute, there's no denying that is an acceptable avenue for expressing ourselves sexually, right? Intimately with women, or women with men. But now the Quran is giving more avenues, and look at this. Those of you lacking, this is chapter 4, verse 25. Those of you lacking the ability to marry enfranchised women from the ranks of embracers, in other words, fully free, independent, self-sustained, naturalized citizens of your country, from the ranks of those who lack the ability to marry enfranchised women from the ranks of embracers, could opt for disenfranchised girls under your stewardship from the ranks of embracers. Now, what could this verse possibly mean? Now, Muslims have brought in the whole idea of sex slaves here, concubines, which I don't think is language that was in the first place intended here, and which I don't think is language that is useful. So you're going to make this verse useless if you try to read slavery into it. Then we might as well discard this verse, because then it has no benefit for us in our times when we don't have women who are sexual or sex slaves. The verse might be useful, and I not that I'm in agreement with it, during the Ottoman times when they had concubines, hundreds of concubines, or the Abbasid kings and the Umayyad kings, when sex slaves were rampant or rife. Here we're talking about disenfranchised girls, women who are not really free as an independent citizen. Now, you make of that what you think. I have in my society women who are, due to whatever reason, unable to fend for themselves. They are either they lost their freedom due to minor crimes, due to addiction, I don't know, maybe due to other problems. They're unable to function. And the Quran sets up a category of women that could become disenfranchised, in other words, not being free in the full sense of the word to own property or to own, but to become beholden or under the care or under the stewardship of a man. So here the Quran is saying, those of you who lacking the ability to marry enfranchised, free and economically independent women from the ranks of embraces, who have a family, who have a father, a mother, uncles, aunts, who are in all aspects of the word free, may marry women who lack that support structures, right? Who have been abandoned by society due to their own actions or due to the actions of others. The Quran then says you may marry normal women, free women, with all the rights that come with that to those women. You know, in other words, you need to care for them, keep them under the level that they were maintained in their dad's house. You may also take disenfranchised girls under your stewardship from the ranks of embraces. God knows your level of commitment you are from each other. Marry them, but do gain the permission of their folks first, and spend on them dues that are commonly acceptable. So in other words, instead of having the idea of nafaqah, of the regular rights that are due to the wife as a free and economically independent woman, you may marry these lesser fortunate women with permission of their folks. There's no slavery. This verse does not say you may just grab any person that you are in charge of, responsible for, and sleep with him. No, it says you need to ask their permission to marry you then, to become more than just somebody that you are responsible for financially. And you might have 10, 20, 30 of these women. Some of them might be old, some of them might be young, some of them might have grown up. You might be a younger man, an older man, whatever. But here you are told that take women who are not necessarily highly independent, you know, a free woman, a financially independent woman. You may take these women who are financially dependent with their permission and marry them. But this is a different type of marriage. This is what we call milkul yamin. This is marriage that where there are less responsibility to you as a husband, right? Because it says here, spend on them dues that are commonly acceptable. وَأْتُوهُنَّ أُجُورَهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Now this is a different word. Bil-ma'ruf means be fair to them. Be fair to them. Then if after they are newly empowered they commit, this is important, as long as they seek enfranchisement and not mere lust or secret love affairs. Now this second category, and this is a very, very important point here, this is crucial to this section of the video, this first point, and the other three won't be this long, is that Islam allows marriage and the normal sexual relations within a regular monogamous relationship, right? One man, one wife, fine, till death do us part. That's an oath you can make, but in Islam we don't have any such oath in the marriage agreement. The marriage is much more of an agreement. It is an aqd. In Arabic is what aqd. It is something that you both agree to with witnesses. And the regular aqdun nikah means I take this woman takes me as a partner, and we shall remain together. And the wording we used when we recite this aqd is zawajtuka uzawwijuka ala ma amara Allahu bihi min imsakin bi ma'ruf. We promise, we undertake, we agree to stick together in kindness and in love, or to separate with decency if we don't want to be together anymore. That is the Islamic aqdun nikah. We don't have till death do us part and, you know, forever ever in the day. We have in Islam more of we agree to share our lives, right, until the time that we decide not to share our lives, and then we will depart, separate amicably. Now, my friends, this is the point here, is that and intrinsic to that agreement, the Aqd Nikah, is the caring of your wife, looking after her financially, making sure that she is compensated well when she bears children, when she rears children, to always. And then there's also the maskavi, or the dowry, which is a huge responsibility on the man, because instead of making it a nominal $5 or $10, that is a guarantee. If you marry a free woman, an independent woman, a financially independent woman, and you are going to bring motherhood, childbearing to her, making a huge imposition on her in terms of her career, in terms of her financial independence, there needs to be this dowry. And this dowry is to eliminate the possibility of frivolous marriages and frivolous divorces. And believe me, I've seen a fair number of those, where a guy marries a girl, she's highly successful, she's a qualified person, she's a professional in whatever field, accounting or a senior director in government, and she marries, and suddenly she has to take leave of absence because she's having a baby, or she's having 2 babies, and her career suffers. And then the man decides, no, I'm done with this marriage, and he moves on. He says, I talak you, I divorce you, and he's done. The maskavi, or the dowry, is there to prevent frivolous divorces, frivolous marriages, and frivolous divorces, especially when the woman has a lot to lose. Now, I have a daughter myself, and that was one of the key points at the time of her marriage, is how do we, and people are in love when they want to get married, but as any businessman will tell you, that no decision needs to be based on emotional grounds. You need to, for one moment at least during the marriage agreement, you need to be unemotional when it comes to finances, and you need to give a place for the idea of a dowry. And the dowry should be a guarantee against frivolous marriages and frivolous divorces. It makes the man treat the marriage with a necessary seriousness. Okay. So where am I? We've looked at now the various options. Now, option 1 is the regular marriage, which comes with a lot of rights to the wife, because these are women who are financially independent. But because it seems as if the weight is more on the man financially, where there's a lot more burden on the man, the Quran offers the man an alternative. And when we look at this verse here, this verse is the alternative. This verse is saying to men, okay, so if these financially independent women are going to be too difficult for you to be married with right now, then maybe you can marry less fortunate women who are, which you are already caring for, but not your wives. And for those women who are less fortunate, who don't have any financial independence, they start out with almost nothing. For them, you can marry them, but you should make a financial or some sort of contribution to them. You should support them somehow. Obviously, it's not to the level of the dowry, where the dowry is offset against the woman's financial level. Here you can structure dowry where it's basically acceptable to this young woman, or this whatever older woman. And this is a second option. Now, this is my understanding of Milkul Yamin, and this is not just my understanding. I'm not alone in this. I have, I listened to Sheikh Imran Hussein a few nights ago, and he made almost this exact same point, that Milkul Yamin is just an alternative form of marriage where the dowry and where the requirements and the preconditions are not as high, as strenuous as with the milkul yamin, which are women that are already dependent, are not financially, economically dependent, don't have wealth inheritance that they might come into from parents. They can only gain from such a relationship. And that is exactly what this verse says. It is a means of them climbing the social ladder. As long as they seek enfranchisement, in other words, it is a means for them to become economically, financially independent. It must not be for lust, not mere lust, nor secret love affairs. Those are the two important points. You are not marrying somebody secretly, clandestinely. And in fact, this Imran Hussain, Shaik Imran Hussain, I differ with a lot of what he is selling, and I don't agree with everything. But on this point, I think I heard him clearly and I understood, and I actually concur, is that we in Islam, the worldview espoused in the Quran is not one where there are secret love affairs. And he made the example, he says rats breed in the dark. Rats seek the dark, but not men. Men operate in sunlight and in light. So I've given you two avenues now to express ourselves. And if you can't do avenue one, then it's avenue two. Now let's go for more avenues. Let's look at more avenues. There's this verse then, which in my opinion does uphold multi-partner, a situation with multiple wives. If you fear that you will not do right by the defenseless children, then rather marry the women accompanying these children whom you feel attracted to, 2, 3, and 4. But if you worry that you are unable to fairly manage multiple women, then marry only one, or marry those women already under your stewardship. That is preferred if you are to avoid iniquity. Yes, I'm going to get people who say to me, Anwar, this verse clearly doesn't support to uphold polygamy. That's your view. Like, you have multiple, we can have two views on a verse. You don't have to get upset with me. My view is that this verse seems to be not mutashabiyat, it seems to be muhkamat, it seems to be literal and legal in nature. And so I'm going to assume that. But the standard, I can agree with you that the standard is set quite high. It is quite a strenuous standard. The standard to marry two wives is that you need to deal justly with them. So if you're going to marry two women, you need to show absolute justice and lack of prejudice, discrimination, unfairness between them. And for that reason, I guess many men will be excluded. But yet there are many men that will be included. Why am I raising polygamy here as a third avenue? Remember I said to you, there's the normal marriage, monogamy. There's the marriage to the milkul yamin, women who are dependent on you, who are under your patronage, that you feed, that you house, that you clothe, that have fallen on bad times due to their own making or due to social circumstances. You may marry them legally, not sleep with them just like that, with their permission. And then the third thing now is that polygamy is that more women per man. Now, I don't have to, it doesn't take a huge stretch of the imagination to figure out that if there are 5 men and 5 women, or say 4 men and 4 women, if that is the reality, if that is the society in microcosm that we have, then the one man that is most hardworking, most successful, most fair, strongest, most self-disciplined, will be able to attract the women. And all 4 women would be vying for that one good, sound man. I also don't have to mention to you that the drug addict, the lazy guy, the washout, the absolute problem person, or the sick man, or the unhealthy man, or the mentally unwell one of the 4 will not get any woman. Do you see where this is going? The idea of polygamy actually allows successful, healthy, hardworking men to procreate, to spread their genes. And for those weak, unhealthy, poorly disciplined, weak in whatever form, to not have their genes perpetuated in society. And that is the rational, logical argument I want to make for polygamy. However, if all men are equally well, disciplined, hardworking, healthy, etc., the chances are that those 4 women would marry the 4 men. And that is exactly why our genes are 50%, 50-50, male-female. So the reality is that there's at any given time always about 51% women in the world, and about 49% of the human population will be men. That's what I've seen in most countries. And so there's always a few extra men, or a few extra women that might have a problem finding a partner in life. Of course, polygamy, there are situations where polygamy might be useful, where a woman is older and she doesn't require the full-time presence or attention of a man, when she's financially independent, and she might welcome it more if a man is less present in her life. And that's a thing that I've physically actually experienced with a very close family member, is that the second wife is a highly professional, highly, very active woman in her career, and she appreciates the less intrusion on her career beyond childbearing age, and it just works. My friends, I've given you now one, normal marriage as the Christian marriage is envisaged or envisioned. Number 2, milkul yamin, marriage to women who are disenfranchised, less fortunate. Number 3, allowing for more women to marry one man. In other words, allowing those who are weak, men, undisciplined, to not burden the women with their problems. And I've seen that also, how men with their problems burden these women with their problems. And then number 4 is something that is unexpected, that you might have not expected, where we also differ from the Christian vision of marriage, is that in Islam, and I've actually alluded to it a few minutes ago, is divorce is something not as as far-sighted or extraordinary as it would be in the Christian worldview. Of course, in a Catholic sect of Christianity, Catholicism, it's almost illegal to divorce, and poor Christians in the Dark Ages, they were burdened with one partner till death do them part. They never could change their partners. Whereas if we look at the Islamic vision, it actually makes it quite normal. It's crazy how normal it is. Look at this verse here. Should you wish to take another wife in place of one wife, one to whom you have paid a fortune in dowry, do not take back of it even a single cent. Will you then prefer to commit slander and sin openly? So it seems it makes it wa in aradtum istibdal zawj makana zawj. You won't believe how normal the Quranic text makes it sound. It almost normalizes the idea of breaking up the marriage. Now, I always believed that marriage is something you don't break, because I was also being in this Muslim idea of mirroring the Christian worldview. And you need to defend the marriage. And there was even a hadith, the divorce is the most hated lawful act in the sight of God. There's this hadith which I often acted on and advised people on, until I started seeing these verses, and these verses make it seem almost like look, you stay married as long as you're both happy and fulfilled and nobody's abusing anyone else and nobody's burdening anyone else. As long as that is the way the marriage goes, the marriage keeps, the marriage survives. But if the marriage reaches a point where somebody is no longer feeling the benefit or feeling fulfilled, and of course the Quran does prescribe, if that is the case, that you should bring mediation from both families. So the Quran is not almost making it like it's willy-nilly divorce, right? It's not willy-nilly. But it goes through a process. There has to be mediation. But then it doesn't place the bar as high as Christianity to undergo or to go through with a divorce. And that to me was very, very interesting when I read the Quran without the hadith coloring my view or my understanding. I suddenly realized, and then I took this further and I looked at many people that I've interacted with in my life, advised couples, is that our understanding, our view of marriage is that save it at all costs. You know what a massive burden that places on the two partners? It places a huge burden on the partners, and it also makes it subject to abuse or exploitation by one of the partners. But imagine this. If we could end the marriage, me and my wife, if we could end it any time, imagine how much the reverse psychology will come into play, is that we will then work to save it rather than work to not save it. Do you understand what I'm saying? The effort, the weight, the energy will go into saving it rather than into not saving it. Because now the energy is, how do I get out? How do I get out? How do I get out? Because everyone is saying, I can't get out. And so I've actually in practice and in my experience seen that it ends up being better for the marriage if people are told that, look, if you don't want to carry on, go for it. Break up, break the marriage up. And then suddenly you have that reverse psychology that kicks in. So my friends, very, very different from the Christian worldview, from the Christian understanding. That is what I want to offer you, is the Quran's vision of marriage and sex. So you have so many ways to indulge or express yourself. I haven't mentioned a fifth one, and that is the idea of contract marriage. Because in Islam, marriage is a contract, so you can go into it and you come out of it. Nowhere does it stipulate it is till death do us part. I'll make that point again. Now, because it's a contract, it allows obviously for time bound, because any contract has got to have the ability to have an exit clause or a term, a fixed term. And clearly the Quran does indicate, that in some verses that where you want to change the marriage or get out of it, this is what you do. So when you see marriage as a contract, inevitably the idea of a term-bound marriage has to arise. And now you're going to tell me, yeah, Anwar, now you are saying, what the Shias are saying about mut'ah, this is mut'ah. Let me just tell you that any contract, if it's a contract between two people, you can stipulate a time for buying, for renting a property, for, buying something, whatever it is, even for a contract that includes marriage. And the Arabs are doing it. The Arabs don't call it mut'ah, they call it ziwaj urfi or whatever else, but there are certain cases. I once had a situation where a gentleman had to travel for 6 months in a particular country, and he said, look, I married a woman. I need companionship. I can't stay alone. I'll go crazy. I'll become a nut. And I married a woman, and I told her I'm going to be here for 6 months. And he wasn't a Shia, and it served his purpose. And this woman was quite happy with it. So, the Quran nowhere says that marriage has to be. You need to show me a verse. And now you're going to tell me, no, it's implicit. No, it's not implicit in the word ziwaj. Because here you can see in this verse that you can get out of a marriage anytime should you wish to take another wife in place of one wife. So it's not implicit in the word ziwaj that it is a lifetime commitment. But if it could be, that would be great. If you could live a lifetime with one woman, have a fulfilled relationship, and have many children, and die one day in old age with each other, great, that works for you. But you cannot shape and mold the Quran to fit your understanding. That would be unfair. You would be imposing your understanding into what is in the book. Right. Now, I've got 3 others here, and I've already gone for more than 50 minutes. But let's go to the next question. Why is there so much pain and suffering? Okay, these questions will be much more of a impression, like my understanding, right? So I'm not going to use ayats or verses so much. I do ground it in my reading of the Quran, but I'll see if I have a particular verse. But why is there so much pain and suffering? My understanding is that like childbirth is a painful experience, but it brings a new human being into this cosmos, into this universe, and it's one of the most trying and difficult experiences. I believe that growth goes with pain and suffering, and I believe that pain and suffering is part and parcel of. Now, yes, you get extreme pain and suffering. You get cancers of the most extreme form that afflict children. Yes, I understand what you're saying when you're telling me pain and suffering seems unfair, Anwar. Why must these babies, why must these children suffer? And it is so that it is one of the most difficult things to explain and understand. But what I can say is that pain is not permanent. Pain generally will continue and will wreak hardship and difficulty on a person. But we will either handle it, or we will become unconscious, or we will die. And we don't even know, and with today, with pain medication being what it is, we are able to reduce the pain substantially. Allah didn't create the poppy plant for no reason. Some people say the poppy plant, the essence of hero that is used in morphine, is God's gift to alleviate or to reduce pain. So too with aspirin, which is a very natural substance growing on trees for lesser pain. So for every level of pain, there's also a level of natural intervention that could reduce that pain. Now you look at emotional suffering, emotional trauma. Yes, that's also there. And the emotional trauma of losing a child, there is no more severe trauma than losing a child. And I have personal, very close people to me that have suffered such severe emotional trauma. And all I can say is that it is important for other family there to hold that person's hand, to keep them, to carry them through these times, and to keep a healthy understanding of what our purpose is as humans. When you have the wrong understanding of death, when death is the end of it all, then yes, emotional trauma will ensue when you lose your son or your daughter. But if your understanding is that it's a temporary separation, then that emotional trauma somehow is more palatable. You are able to process it emotionally. That's all I can say on this question. And pain and suffering are there. It's part of growth. It's part of development. Next one is, why do evil people seem to flourish? In our time horizons, yes, they do seem to flourish. And I do believe that for most of Earth's history, evil people seem to be ruling the earth. So you're either tested by fighting against the oppressor or by being the oppressor. in history. So if you are the righteous person, like let's say King Solomon, right, a righteous king, you have the challenge of avoiding or resisting the allurement or the becoming an oppressive power, an oppressive person. So God could give you business, money, wealth, and then your challenge is to resist the temptation to become unjust and oppressive. And all of us are given something, and we could be oppressive at our own level. And so even the poor people can decide to oppress him or herself. So I don't think oppression is necessarily always, we are always faced with injustice, either within ourselves or without ourselves. And I believe there were periods in history when the oppressors were not in charge, when there were good people in charge. And it's always, the temptation is there. We are always going to be faced with one of the two options: temptation by wealth, or temptation by being denied wealth. What can I do? What can I do to find relief from my pain? I think this is maybe emotional or maybe physical pain. All I can say is that God has created certain intervention by family, and you need to find somebody who will intervene professionally. God has made intervention. Man dhal ladhi yashfa'u 'indahu illa bi'idhnih. Who can intervene without his permission? So God has given some people to intervene on his behalf, which is the medical expert, which is the wise person, the counselor. And so you need to seek the intervention of a counselor. You need to seek the intervention of medicine of whatever form, or any herb, or whatever life-changing practice you need to undertake, or even to move out from your problem situation. And my friends, that wraps it up. I hope I've done justice to the questions. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.